Hello everybody, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. And here in the United States we like to be first and best and all that sort of thing. Well, according to a recent Medscape article, the FDA approves drugs faster than any other regulatory agency in the entire world at this time. The drugs are increasingly more dangerous and are supported by weaker and sometimes completely inconclusive evidence. For example, Nuplazid, which was developed to address hallucinations and delusions for Parkinson's patients, failed 2 clinical trials. In response to that, the company that makes it revised the standards for efficacy, and then a 3rd trial based on the new and revised standards showed some minimal benefit. Now, in spite of that, more of the patients taking the drug died or had serious side effects than those taking the placebo, but the drug was approved in 2016. It cost $24,000 per year, and since its approval, over 6,800 adverse events and 887 deaths have been reported. And yes, it is still on the market today, because why would you take a drug like that off the market, right? Another marginal drug approved by the FDA is Uloric to treat gout. Patients taking this drug had more heart attacks, strokes, and heart failure than those who were taking standard or even no medication at all. After the drug was approved, the manufacturer actually reported that patients taking it were 34% more likely to die from heart disease than those who took other gout medications. This drug also remains on the market. The FDA's standards for approval right now are so lax that other regulatory agencies that have demonstrated their allegiance to drug companies are turning down drugs that are approved by the FDA. Take Follitin, for example. The drug shrinks tumors, but it doesn't extend life at all for cancer patients. 7 weeks of treatments with this useless drug costs $92,000, which is an awful lot of money for a drug that isn't going to extend your life by a single day. The European Medicines Agency turned it down. Now, the EMA, you might remember from previous broadcasts, is the one that is so in bed with the drug companies that in response to a request to look into side effects as a result of the HPV vaccine, the EMA told the drug companies to search their files to see if they could find anything wrong or any adverse events. And this is shocking. The drug companies reported back that there were no complaints. The drug was fine, the vaccine was fine, and the EMA reported that all was well with the HPV vaccine. No need to look any further. So this drug is so bad that that agency turned it down. Our agency approves it. They even turned this one down. Now, how does this happen? There are several ways in which the FDA can grant fast approval for ineffective drugs. One is they will often approve a drug with only 1 clinical trial, and then only after the design is changed in order to show some benefit. I mean, this is better than science fiction. You can't make up something like this. And that's what happened with Nuplazid. Surrogate markers like shrinking tumors are used instead of outcomes like survival to evaluate the drug, and that's how you end up with the useless drug Follitin. And by the way, cancer drugs notorious for this type of thing. According to Dr. Michael Carome, a former U.S. Department of Health and Human Services official, he says, quote, "Instead of a regulator and a regulated industry, we now have a partnership." And boy, is he right about that. He's referring to the financial relationship between drug companies and the FDA, which was created by Congress in 1992, this very cozy relationship. During 2017 alone, drug companies paid $905 million, almost $1 billion in fees to the FDA, and that $905 million constituted 75% of the agency's new drug review department. But there are other more subtle influences on drug approvals, and one of them is patient advocacy groups, which are mostly funded by drug companies. These groups lobby Congress to prod the FDA to approve drugs and devices faster. And then representatives of these groups show up at hearings for committees to review applications, and they appeal to the emotions of the panel members and plead with them to approve products, saying that people will die if the FDA doesn't act immediately. This is most often not the case, and these volunteers, unfortunately, are unwitting pawns of drug companies that will do almost anything to get their products approved and to promote their sales. Many, if not most, of the doctors that are on these panels work for the drug companies, and often for the company that is submitting a drug or a product for review, which is, I mean, it's just impossible to think that these people can overcome that type of conflict of interest. If nothing else, the appearance of conflict of interest should just make this a non-starter and it shouldn't go on anymore. The net effect of these conflicts and outright misbehavior is the FDA approval really no longer means anything. I think at one point in time you could say that FDA approved meant safe and at least marginally effective, and that's just not true. Now, what this means to the public is that patients should not assume, first of all, that new drugs are better than old ones. Dr. Gilbert Welch has written about this a lot and says that he does not like to prescribe a drug unless it's been on the market 5 or more years because of so much misbehavior in the approval process. Cancer patients have to be particularly wary because many new and expensive drugs that oncologists are trained to market by drug reps are virtually useless. Patients are often better off with older drugs or even looking outside traditional oncology for solutions to their cancer. And patients should avoid all advice, I think, offered by nonprofit disease groups, which are really fronts for drug companies. I've made a personal decision not to financially support any of these groups because I think there are a lot of well-meaning people who are involved in these groups, but their real business is not patient advocacy, but rather drug company promotion. And then finally, Congress should act immediately to undo the 1992 legislation that created this mess. I can't imagine in what universe anybody thought this was a good idea, but, you know, I don't know. I can't explain our elected officials. I think we should get rid of them and start again. That's probably the best thing to do. All right, so on to something that might be useful for you and many of the people you know. I want to talk about macular degeneration. Age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, is the leading cause of permanent vision loss in people over 50 years of age. The condition involves damage to the macula, the part of the eye involved in central vision, and also seeing finer details. There are 2 types of AMD, dry or non-exudative, and wet or neovascular. The early form of AMD is almost always dry and is characterized by something called drusen, or fatty deposits. At this point, there is little to no loss of vision, but patients are told that they now have increased risk of vision loss if they proceed to develop the wet form. Wet AMD occurs when new blood vessels begin to develop in the back of the eye due to a process called angiogenesis. Blood and or fluid can leak into the macula from these vessels, resulting in the development of scars and blind spots. Wet AMD accounts for only 10 to 15% of cases, but it's responsible for almost 90% of blindness in AMD patients. There are several risk factors for AMD, including genetics, but those that are controllable, can't do much about your genetics, but the ones that are controllable include cigarette smoking, diet, and cardiovascular disease. High homocysteine levels are a risk factor, along with low serum B12 levels. In one research study, patients with wet AMD had homocysteine levels 27.9% higher than those with dry AMD and 21.9% higher than controls. Now, homocysteine is a byproduct of protein metabolism, particularly animal protein. In addition to being a risk factor for AMD, elevated levels are also a risk factor for coronary artery disease. The reference ranges for normal homocysteine levels are between 4 and 15. Lower is better, and conversion to a plant-based diet works really quickly to reduce plasma homocysteine levels. In one study, just 1 week on a vegan diet resulted in a 13% reduction in homocysteine level in study subjects. The diet that is good for the cardiovascular system is also really good for the eyes. Diet can play an even more direct role in the development of AMD. Research shows that the retina is particularly susceptible to damage from oxidative stress. Therefore, high antioxidant foods that counter oxidative stress may be protective against the condition. In one study, patients with the highest dietary intake of carotenoids had significantly reduced risk of developing AMD as compared to those who consumed the least. The carotenoids most strongly associated with reduced risk were lutein and zeaxanthin, which are found in green leafy vegetables, peas, corn, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, asparagus, and carrots. Another study that included over 4,000 patients at risk of developing AMD showed that dietary intake of antioxidant-rich foods was associated with a reduced risk. Now, there's a lot of talk about supplements that can be used to prevent AMD, so I thought I would cover that. The ARID study found that patients with intermediate AMD who took a combination of vitamin C, vitamin E, beta-carotene, zinc, and copper had a 25% lower risk of developing advanced AMD. The ARIDS-2 study replaced the beta-carotene with lutein and zeaxanthin because beta-carotene supplements have been shown to increase the risk of lung cancer. And in addition, the researchers added EPA, DHA, or a combination of both. The substitution of both those two antioxidants, which are deemed superior for eye health, and the omega-3 fatty acids made absolutely no difference in the progression of to advanced AMD. The authors wrote that the only real benefit that could be seen from this study was the replacement of beta-carotene, which is known to contribute to or increase the risk of cancer, with two antioxidants for which we don't have that type of information at this point. So the real better option is to eat a diet high in antioxidant-rich foods. That would mean plant foods, rather than taking isolated nutrient supplements. A plant-based diet reduces the risk of AMD and many other chronic degenerative conditions. AMD is age-related, by the way. Age does increase the risk, but it is not a given that as you get older, you have to lose your eyesight. Practicing good diet and lifestyle habits protects the eyes, just like good habits protect the rest of the body. So just one thing that I forgot to mention on Tuesday, keep those emails coming regarding careers and that sort of thing. We have everything from coaching programs to really, if you want to be like me, if you want to do the types of work that I do, we have programs that can train you to do that. So if you're interested in any of the stuff we do here, PamHopper@msn.com is my email address. I always talk to people personally who want to talk about careers, so send me an email, we'll set something up. All right, that's all for today and for the week. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think might enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you next week with more news.